CSS. There's a couple things that I want to cover for administrivia first, before we get really into it. We're going to cover some HTML after that, and then discuss some design in CSS. The administrivia general reminders I want to talk about. First off is the Zoom chat expectation is that most of our comments there are reserved for content-specific questions or class-specific questions. Beforehand, we can talk about things like my background or things like that. That's totally fine. But once we get into lecture, there's enough of us here that we'd really appreciate if we can try to keep most of the chat there to course-specific things. That's our main expectation. Again, if you have questions, you can type hand, and I will try to adjust you, or Andrew will interrupt me when I miss it in order to get the questions out. So that's our general chat expectations. The Zoom notifications hopefully have stopped. We believe they were fixed at the university level. So hopefully they will settle down. For the most part, though, we're really sorry that we've spammed you with so many notifications. I know it was a lot, and I know it probably has drowned out a lot of other things that you probably wanted to see. I'm really sorry about that, but it should be fixed now. We should be okay. We will remind you in other forums about new things created because you won't be notified about new Zoom meetings anymore. So hopefully that's all set up. Another reminder, we've had a number of folks ask us about GitLab. Sorry, there's a typo there. GitLab accounts. And so if you have questions about that, you should try to log in with the account first at some point. And what that does is create your account. And you have to try to log in first once in order for that to be fixed. Okay, if you continue to have problems, let us know, let your TA know, email one of us, the instructors, and we'll try to get it resolved as we can. I also wanted to talk about reminders for opportunities for you to get more help. The WPL, the Web Programming Labs, are your opportunity to just stop by in a Zoom call and ask TAs for help. They're around to give you advice, answer questions, and generally help out with homeworks and CPs and general HTML and web programming content. You can also come to office hours where Andrew and I will be staffing. We'll have office hours generally right after lecture. And those links are posted in the ed post, that pinned one that says all Zoom links. It has all of those Zoom links for both WPL and office hours. Also sections. Please make sure you're attending the section that you're signed up for, in part because this allows your TAs to be able to connect with you on both knowing your name and who you are because they have that roster there, and also making sure that we're spread out enough so that we can have about equal portions of people within each section. So please make sure to attend the section you are assigned to. If for whatever reason you have a time consideration or a time concern there or some sort of conflict with the one you are signed up for, let us know and we'll figure it out. CP1, Creative Project 1, is out now. And again, as I mentioned on Monday, these projects are your opportunity to play around with the content, see how it works for you, trying it out, play around, and just have fun before the actual homework. The homework will be released next week, and sometime next week. We don't know the exact date yet, but we'll release it next week. Alicia has a question.
Hi, yeah, I was just wondering, I've been looking at the first creative project, and I had a hard time telling if the first HTML file is supposed to be, it like has to be our resume, or can it be anything? I was a little confused about that.
Yeah, I think we're giving you the resume as just a starting point because it's a Doesn't require a whole lot of creativity or new ideas. You can just you have a basis to start from, but really it could be more or less anything. The just about me and resume style page is a nice way to start.
All right, thank you.
Yep. Aaron also has a question.
Yeah. Hi. Uh, can you elaborate a little bit more on the relationship between Git grade and GitLab? I got GitLab working and it's cloning fine, but it keeps saying I have to be a super user to use Git grade, even though I'm logged in.
Yeah. I'm curious to know more about where you're seeing Git grade show up. It's a technology we've used in the past. It's a piece of software used in past quarters, but we're trying not to use it this quarter. So GitLab should be your primary entrance point for cloning repositories and submitting code to repositories, and then we'll use grade scope as the thing to actually turn things in. You shouldn't also need super user permissions. But if you send your TA an email or post on Ed with the details with some screenshots or copy paste of the error code you're seeing, and maybe CC me, we can help debug that.
Okay, so basically we won't be needing Git grade, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. One more question, and then I do want to move on. Christopher has a question.
Sorry if this is a stupid question, but for the VS Code, like I got it set up to, I got connected to GitLab, and I got all that sorted out. But when we're coding for our actual web page, are we doing that inside of VS Code, or like which tab do we use for that?
You'll more than likely want to do it in VS Code. That editor is going to give you all of the niceties, and we'll see some of that in a moment, around code completion and helping you give some indications on what's going wrong if things are going wrong. You can edit in GitLab, I believe, but it's kind of interesting. So I stress probably editing things in VS Code first, and then getting comfortable with that, and then maybe trying out the other. But start with VS Code. Okay, Nikhil, we'll get to your question in a bit. I do want to continue on for a second based on how much time we have. And if it's a quick question, go ahead and type it into chat, and hopefully one of our staff can get to it there. So last reminder on things that can help out. We have mentor circles, which are just another low-key opportunity to hang out and ask TAs questions. These are generally TAs who've done the course a couple times and can really give you a lot of good advice on where to go and what to do with the course and with the content. Those are by appointment and and so we want to know who's interested in those and when. So fill that out as soon as you can. Okay. As mentioned, the creative project number 1 is out now. It'll be due next week. And you can get a link to it there on the creative project page. The difference between the due date and the lock date is that between the two, you can continue to turn things in, but you will spend late days. After the lock date, you cannot turn in anymore. So that's going to be the main difference. You are welcome to turn it in anytime before the due date and up to the due date, and then between the due and the lock, you will spend late days. So that's the difference between those two times. So I also want to spend a moment talking about how things are going so far. A couple of the good things, we've seen a lot of great engagement, both here in lecture and in section. We've gotten a lot of good questions. We've had folks with cameras on in section and people working together in breakouts, and that's really wonderful to see, given this weird remote teaching opportunity that we're in. It's great to see that people are embracing it and going all in on using it. So I'm really glad that we're seeing all of that great engagement. The not so great things, GitLab access has been slow coming for some people. Hopefully we're trying to address that. Again, try to log in first before asking any questions about access, because that first login is what gives you, creates your account in GitLab. If you continue to have access problems, let us know. And then that first HTML exercise that we were doing in section yesterday, like, do we even know HTML? I barely covered that on Monday. You're right. So we're going to cover a little bit more of that today, and we'll be covering a little bit more of that in section tomorrow, and hopefully that kind of covers some of that worry that you were having with HTML yesterday. As mentioned, the Zoom notifications are everywhere. Hopefully those have quieted down, and you won't see as many of those anymore. So I also want to know generally just how are things doing. So I want to get some input from you all on how you think things are going. And I'll try not to present the answers here, so you can feel free if you want to answer however you want. It's open-ended, multiple choice, no right answer again, to try to see just how are you feeling about the course. If you are having struggles, or if you are having any concerns with the course that you feel need to be addressed, please don't hesitate to email your TA, email myself or Andrew or both, and let us know how things are feeling. We do want to make sure that any of your concerns are addressed as soon as we can, given that we're in the very beginning of the quarter, so that we can try to make sure things are good moving forward. So I'll leave that up for a while, so that people have an opportunity to answer how they feel. But I just trying to get a sense of where we are, so that if we need to make dramatic changes of any kind, we kind of have a feeling for what that looks like. Okay, a little bit of a review first. We covered two big things on Monday, and that was the difference between the internet and the web. The internet is that fundamental layer that is providing connection between different computers and different servers via Ethernet cables and network switches and that whole thing. And there are layers of technology that enable the internet. At the very low level, we have things like the actual cables that are connecting computers. It bubbles up eventually to the internet protocol, those IP addresses. And those are the things, the numbers that allow us to send information between computers. There's really no centralized control over this. There's a couple of organizations that define best practices and have some control over some things. Well, there's no single government or single corporation that absolutely controls everything. And part of that is enabled by technology like the domain name system. And that's an ability for us to map between names like google.com or cs.washington.edu over to numbers, those IP addresses that allow us to communicate over the internet to get to those resources. The web is kind of starting to build on top of that layered system of the internet, where we know that there are servers out there that have web pages and information that we want, and we would like to get them. And again, we don't have google.com or courses.cs.washington.edu on our computer. There's some other computer and some other server that has that. And so we call this the client server model, where my laptop is a client. It does not have the information, but it would like it. And so it goes and it requests from the server over the internet for that information. And then via the internet, that information is returned back. We'll return to this idea of this client server model throughout the course. And so it's important to start thinking about what that looks like in terms of where the data is that I want. And so once we get the website, we look at it structured in 4 different columns. We have that initial content, which is just the words and images. It has no layout, it has no design, has no structure at all. It's just the words and just the images. We provide structure to those words and images with HTML. And so we have our bare bones layout and our bare bones structure of how things look and what the meaning of our content is provided by HTML. After that, we give it some look, some style. We make it have yellow text. We make it have bold headlines. We give it an orange background. I'm not good with colors, so I know those clash, but don't know how to fix it. And we do that with cascading style sheets or CSS. We'll start to talk about that today a little bit. And then finally, and this will be starting next week, we'll talk about our behavior, how things move, what happens when you click on different things. These 4 different pillars are going to be the basis for all of our websites. Your initial creative project will touch mostly on HTML with some CSS in it as well. Check out the spec for more information on what we're expecting on CSS. We haven't introduced it yet, but we're going to start it today. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about HTML. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And so I want to break that down a little bit and look at the hypertext and the markup language. So there's a debate among people about whether HTML is a programming language or not. And really it's that markup language part of it that is the basis of that debate. But first, the hypertext is meaning that we are taking text that has a little bit more information about it. That hyper is a prefix that means more or increased, right? So it's better than text. And what we're doing with that text that needs to have more information is we are adding some markup to it. We are taking some text, we are adding labels to it here and there to make it have more information. So we are creating hypertext out of text by marking it up. And then the language part of it defines that there's a very well-defined specification for what those markup tags look like. So that's our HTML. Generally, it describes the structure and content of the information on a web page. It's a little bit confusing in terms of how it controls how things show up, because you can define some bold text or some links with HTML, and it'll change the appearance of the HTML. And that's largely because the browsers are doing a little bit of work on your behalf to kind of guess what the meaning of the text should look like. Fundamentally, though, we want to use CSS as the thing that controls the appearance of things. And the reason is because we want to maintain a separation of concerns. This is a phrase that we'll use continually throughout the quarter. And what we're trying to do is separate the structure and content of the website with how it looks. So imagine for a second that you have a blog and you would like to edit one of the posts. You don't want to have to necessarily worry about how the post looks. You just want to make some typo fixes or add a paragraph or so of text. You want that to have a consistent feel across all your posts. And for that task, making that edit to that blog post, all you want to do is edit the text. You don't have to worry about there's all these other rules and other things around that are potentially confusing things and potentially going to get messed up. You just want to worry about the text. And so by having the content and the structure in HTML and the appearance and styling in CSS, we can separate those two things and make sure that we can only edit the text or only edit the style. Okay. There's lots of different ways that HTML shows up. We're not expecting you to memorize all of them, but we're going to cover some important ones here today. So our basic, Andrew, yeah?
questions in the Zoom chat. I think Aaron had a question.
Yeah, Aaron, you have a question. So the question here is, so why are so many video streaming websites using, quote, HTML5? So they're using HTML5 instead of using HTML4. There you go. There's your answer. No, so the big difference that HTML5 introduced over previous versions of HTML is this notion of semantic tags or markup information that provides more meaning. Previous versions of HTML were pretty basic in terms of what they were providing on tags that meant things. That you had some basic information like links and sections, not sections, but divs, and we'll cover what that is in a second. But beyond that, you didn't have much. And HTML started adding this idea that we can provide more information through the tags that we create. One of those such tags is providing the ability for video streaming and many other things. And what this does is provide the browser a bit of control in terms of what it wants to do on providing security of that video stream. It seamlessly integrates with the rest of the website in terms of layout and styling. And there's a number of other things, but having this ability to define a piece of content as this is a video, that was introduced in HTML5. And so 5 is the version number of the specification, and that was when it started. Flash is a can of worms that I don't know that we have time to get into. But and it's that security piece that really is the linchpin between Flash and HTML5. Flash provided people the ability to execute arbitrary code on client computers, and that's generally bad. And so Flash is being phased out pretty much across the entire internet. And most browsers have stopped supporting it or strongly discourage users from using it. And so that's also part of the reason why we're switching to HTML5 for all videos, because those are going to be a little bit more secure and prevent arbitrary code execution. Okay, thank you for the question. That was great. So the basic structure of an HTML page, pretty much all HTML pages follow this structure. And the first thing is we need a file that with an extension of .html, and then we define what type of thing it is. This helps also define the version of HTML we're using, and then we can get into the actual text. Okay, so instead of just showing you slides, I'm going to drop out of the slides and switch to some live coding. Can you see a terminal now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So there's not a lot in this directory. And so what I'm going to do is start off with a new project. This is something I've not touched on yet, and I want to create a new project. And I know that in our course, we are using GitLab. I also know from software engineering that it's a good idea to have version control on all of your projects. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new Git repository. And I do that by using git init, which initializes that Git repository. Then I know that there's some files in here already, so I'm going to add the one file that's here. And I'll make my term a little bit wider. And then I will commit it, which will open up a message, add files. Okay, so I've got my initial project all set up. That's good to go. The the next thing I know is that all websites start with a file that has the .html extension. And so I know that it's not there. So I do my ls, which is my list command in the shell to see what files are in the directory. There's no file there. But I can create it here, but I want to show how to create it in Visual Studio Code. So if you haven't seen this already, there's a way to install a command in your command line to open up Visual Studio Code here. And so I can use that command, and I'm going to switch my screen share over to Visual Studio Code. So that command opens up Visual Studio Code. And now what I can do here is in this directory, I can hover over here and create a new file. And I'm going to call it index.html because, again, we want our files to all be in HTML. Using the name index is just a convention, a standard for saying the main page. In my terminal, the yellow versus green says that I have changes pending that I have not yet committed. Good question. Okay. I now have a basic HTML page with nothing in it. And we could open this up in the browser and there's going to be nothing there. But from the slides, I did show you that there's a couple things that all HTML files have. So the first thing is this doc type HTML. And what this says is that the type of thing that this file is an HTML file, and that we're going to use the latest and greatest HTML, which is going to be 5 by default. The next thing is that it always has an HTML tag. And this indicates the main part of the entirety of the page is going to be contained within those HTML tags. And for almost every single HTML tag, we have an open and a close. And VS Code will add a lot of that for us, so we don't generally have to worry about it. But it's good to be aware of as always looking for that close tag to be available wherever you might need it to be. The other two things we saw on the slide were the head and the body. So these two tags are providing some information about what the page is. The head is giving some information about just kind of what the general purpose and some metadata and some descriptions about the web page. We call it the head because it's used as the header, and the header isn't seen by users, but it gets interpreted as information as part of the page. It adds to the browser's information of the page. One of the things that it does is, for example, you'll see in the browser that the tab has the name of the page. And if you don't specify anything, it's just going to be the URL. And what we can do to specify that is give a title within the head. So again, this is a description of the web page. In all the head tags are descriptions of the web page, and the title is going to be what shows up in the tab. So for now, I'm just going to call it my CSE154 website. I'll make this a little bit bigger. All right. Now, before we get into the body, I'm going to switch back to the slides for a second. Nikhil has a question.
Don't we have to put it in quotes because it's a string?
That's an interesting question. In other languages, like and so this is part of this. Slightly gets into my comment earlier about is HTML a programming language, and for now, I'm going to say no, because we don't need to interpret things in the same way that other programming languages need to be interpreted. So in Python or Java or C++ or other or programming languages like that, yes, we would absolutely need to put a string like that into quotes. However, HTML is primarily operating on text and content. And so the text is the primary thing that HTML is working on. And so those don't need to be in quotes. In other programming languages, it's the keywords like if, then, curly braces, while, for, all those contracts we're familiar with. Those are the primary things in the language. The text is secondary. HTML, it's the other way around. I saw a question about Bootstrap. Check out the spec for whether you are allowed to use that. We are not going to be covering frameworks as part of the general class structure. We're going to be looking primarily at what we call vanilla HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which is using these tools without a provided framework so that we can learn the basis of how those things are built. We do have a style guide. Check out the website. There's a list, or Tal will put the link there. And you're not necessarily expected to memorize this. However, this will be used everywhere. So it's kind of a good idea to be familiar with it at very least. Okay, so this is our basic structure. And in my editor, I have more or less this, but the question I have here is what goes into the body. As I mentioned, HTML5 is this thing that provides this semantic definition for content within your website. And so what I mean by that is it's giving the browser some information and the user some information on what the various pieces of your page mean. So you could have a header section, which appears at the beginning of whatever bit of content you have. You have the main section, which is the main content in the page, and then maybe the footer which appears at the bottom. So these various tags provide you a little bit of meaning on what your text means. And a good place to start to figure out that meaning is looking at a draft or a drawing of your web page. And it doesn't have to be fancy. I just drew it the other day, and so I don't know if you can see my camera, but like it's just I drew it on a little bit of grid paper. You don't need to be fancy about it, and so this is kind of the website that I want to look at making. So I'm going to switch back to my editor. Okay. Now we have this empty body, and the body is defining the all of the content that appears below the address bar in the browser. So we have that section. So when you look at a browser, you have the tab bar up top, you have the address bar right below it, and then you have that giant white area. The entirety of that white area is defined by the body. And we could put text in there, but it doesn't really have any meaning. It would just be text. And so what we want to start off with is having a main set of content where this is defining for the browser that if there's other content on the page, this is the primary thing you should look at. This is the main content. Within this, I'm going to add a paragraph tag. And this is defining that whatever text I'm saying here is going to be some sort of paragraph. So this is an introductory class on HTML. And if I can spell properly, introductory class on HTML. And so we want to provide as much information as we can about whatever content this is. Since this is just a bit of text, a bit of string text, we say it's a paragraph. It's not main because this is text, right? Main can have images, it can have links, it can have lists, it can have other pages of content, essentially. Main can have anything. And so we're not providing a ton of extra information by just having text in there. So by putting our first paragraph within the paragraph tags, we're saying we're providing a little bit more info on that text to say that, yes, this is a paragraph. So I'm going to save that and open it up in a browser. And now I have to switch what's being displayed. And so the browser is showing now that we have the title up in the tab bar for my CSE154 website. Again, this is what shows up from that title tag. And we have our initial paragraph shown up underneath. We'll go back to the editor. The fun thing about HTML tags, okay, there's lots of different things about it, but there's two big styles of HTML tags. We have our block tags and inline tags. So let's take a look at what that means for a second. So I'm going to add another paragraph here. This is another paragraph of text. And then maybe I'm going to add a list of items. So item number 1, item 2, another thing. All of these tags that I've used here are block tags. So if we go back to the website, how it shows up, I'll make this bigger. You can see that there's a little bit of white space between each and every one of these, and that the browser handles those list items a little bit differently. And I didn't add anything here other than just putting them in different tags. And so to address a question here in the chat real quick. So I have a shortcut installed in VS Code to open HTML files in the browser automatically. So I just hit Alt-B and it opens in the browser. And so I don't worry about the file path. You can also, from the Explorer or browser, you can double click on the file to open it up. Also in VS Code, if you right click on the file, you can see this is where the extension that I have installed. And I will send out information about what this extension is after lecture. But you can have these open in browser buttons from the right click menu on the editor. Okay, you're welcome. So all of these tags are block tags. They define a new block of content. There's another kind of tag, which is called an inline tag. And these aren't going to define new blocks of content. They're going to define smaller bits of information about smaller bits of content. For example, the EM tag is going to be our italics tag. And so if I wrap this introductory word in EM tags, this is telling the browser that just that word should be italics. And it's an inline tag, so I don't need to add any new white space around it. So I'll save, open in browser, and we'll have to switch the sharing. And so now you can see that the introductory word is italics and no additional white space around it. And so once we go back into the editor, we can add a comment in here saying something like, this is the HTML for my web page, and this will not appear in what is displayed to the user because it is a comment. Okay. Good question, Evan. The difference between the EM and the I is that EM is HTML5 version of italics. And the reason we like it, the reason we use EM is that it's not defining a style necessarily of the text. It's defining meaning of the text that most browsers have agreed should be displayed as italics. So that allows screen readers or other tools like that to emphasize that word rather than saying this is italics. I don't know what italics means, but this is emphasized. Speaking of style, given that we have 7 minutes left, I want to transition into talking a little bit about CSS. We've talked about the basic structure of our HTML pages. And as I find the right slide, we'll move forward into CSS. Actually, one thing I do want to address before that is, so there's been lots of questions on, like, are we using the right thing? What's the difference between EM and I, B, and strong? What happens, for example, if I mistyped the nesting of these elements? So what I have here is an incorrect nesting of these elements, of these tags, because we have the end tags are flipped. They're swapped and need to be, you need to have the innermost tags need to be matching, and then the outermost tags matching after that. So what we need to see, what we want to see is this, where we have our strong EM, the content we want to have strong and emphasized, and then we close it off in reverse order. There's inside out. So we have our EM, and we have our strong. But the question is, what do we do if that is incorrect, where we accidentally flip them? Fortunately, there's something called a validator. I'm going to copy out my HTML and go back to the browser. There's this validator, and we have links to this in the quality guides. We'll have links to these here in the slides. We'll have links to these elsewhere. And when you click on this, you'll be sent to the W3C website, and you can paste in all of your HTML, run check, and it'll tell you everything that happens to be going wrong with it. So for example, here, it'll show that we have violated the nesting rules of HTML by having the order wrong. And it'll go in and highlight where we went wrong with that. We also have a warning here that we haven't set the language of the website. I'm not going to worry about that right now. I'm going to do is fix that. And then I will also show what the validator does when we use one of these deprecated tags, like the I tag. We'll go ahead and hit check. And it actually says that we are okay. Which is curious.
Fitz?
Yeah.
I just want to make a quick comment that for homeworks, students will not have to do this manually. There will be automatic linters in GitLab and in Gradescope. And that is the linter that you should use as the ultimate authority for whether or not your HTML is correct.
Yes. Good call out. So this tool, this website is a good first start, but GitLab will do a lot of automatic linting and checking for you to validate that these are all correct. Real briefly, when we're looking at choosing which tags, for example, and choosing what content to say about the browser, we want to maintain some sort of accessible design. And what I mean by that is to try to think about who all is using the web. Web and websites are available largely to everyone. And so anyone with anything happening is going to be able to access your website. 1 in 5 people have some sort of disability across the US. And they come in all different forms and flavors. Visual, auditory, speech, physical, all of these things are different ways that might impair people's abilities to use your website. But there's also this idea of them being temporary or situational, where you might not be able to type or use a mouse to look at a website or use your finger. Accessible design accounts for all of these, and part of making these right decisions in terms of your tags that are used, in terms of where your content is, are going to help make these issues easier, make your website easier to deal with in face of anything that's going on. So we have a minute left. I'm going to start introducing CSS, our cascading style sheets, and how to start styling your web pages. Sometimes you'll see this. You'll see things like how things look just in your HTML. This is bad because there's some accessibility concerns with it. It doesn't give you information about the content. It's telling you how it looks. It's not great code organization. It's that separation of concerns that I mentioned earlier. And it makes it easy to accidentally change your style and hard to, on purpose, change your style across your entire web page. So we've introduced something called the cascading style sheets. We'll talk more about this both in section tomorrow and in lecture on Friday. The basic syntax that we look at for this is saying, what HTML does this rule apply for, and what rules are being applied? So on this slide, the example is all paragraph tags, the text is going to be red, and we're going to use the sans serif font. And so that brings us to time for today. I'm going to call the end here. Thank you so much for your questions in chat. Thank you so much for responding to the poll everywhere and for being here. I'll stay on here for another 5-10 minutes. And then we've got office hours, check ed for the links to that starting at 2:30. So thank you very much, everyone, and we will see you later.